What to you is the darkest, most mature, or most adult moment in the entire history of Doctor Who?
Personally, for me, it comes from the Tennant era from Series 2 with the Age of Steel two-parter when they perform the autopsy on the dead Cyberman. I believe it's when they remove the emotion inhibitor and they discover that it still believes that it is a young woman who is on the eve of her wedding, soon to be married in the morning.
Can you remember your name?
Certainly Phelan.
In Remembrance of the Daleks, when the 7th Doctor tricks Davros into using the Hand of Omega device, that essentially he causes genocide because he destroys the Daleks' homeworld.
For me, it'll probably be Rebel Flesh. That's when it gets quite... What does it mean to be human? And in which case you see the Doctor play with his own identity, and also you see people worry about their own identity at the same time, and you're sort of thrown into, how do I deal about this morally? And yeah, it's a good episode.
What I'm about to play you will change your life, and not for the better.
Can you just hurry up, please, or I'll hit you with my shoe?
Don't cremate me. Don't cremate me.
There is one
Don't cremate
simple,
me.
horrible possibility that has never occurred to anyone throughout human history.
Don't cremate me. Don't cremate me.
Don't say it.
The dead remain conscious. The dead are fully aware of everything that is happening to them.
Series 8 of the revived show promised a new, darker Doctor.
Where are we going?
Into darkness.
One who wasn't your boyfriend or crush, although, but it would keep returning to this man questioning his morals. It set the audience up for a much darker tone, and for the most part, that's what we got.
This is my spoon.
It's always been a show that manages to juggle multiple tones at once, or from episode to episode. Like having a group of friends all find a horrible demise, to the moments later be joking about oral fellatio.
We've even got a bit of a love life.
Oh, let's not go into that.
But as a family show, it's something that it's always had to do. After the, rather appalling, In the Forest of the Night, I was excited yet sceptical for the upcoming two-part finale. I mainly went into this episode with the intrigue as to who Missy was.
Short for mistress. Well, couldn't very well keep calling myself the master. Now, could I?
Dark Water opens on a phone call between Clara and Danny, cross-cutting between them, faintly setting up the format for the episode of the two viewpoint characters.
No, not like that. Not like it's automatic. Not like it's how you and the phone call, the sign-off, the pat on the back.
Clara?
Danny, I will never say those words again, not to anybody else. Ever. Those words from me are yours now.
All before leading into Danny's untimely death. It's a strong, impactful moment through the brilliant editing as well as direction from Talalay, who became the directorial go-to for Capaldi's finales, and they honestly couldn't have picked a better person for the job. Gushing about Talalay aside, Moffat did the most interesting thing they've done with Clara since Kill the Moon and Flatline, which was only 2 episodes ago. Series 8 Clara gets a lot of shit, but I actually think she's quite interesting. They made her borderline psychopathic, and reasonably so. After you'd been out in the universe and seen all of that, something like this would just appear normal.
It was ordinary.
She then proceeds to threaten the Doctor in a way that feels smart and calculated, even if he could just snap his fingers. She takes things into her own hands and proactively tries to make the Doctor bring him back.
I know what you're doing. You're trying to take control.
I am in control. Fuck off!
This all leads to one of the most heartwarming and interesting lines, which really resonates as to who 12 was.
Do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference?
A lot of the other Doctors loved everyone.
Do you know, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before.
But 12 adores the socks off a handful of people and is loyal to them to a T. No matter how many times they disappoint him, no matter how many times they
let me down,
it helps elevate the companions he travels with, especially with Bill, as he instantly knows how great she is from something as simple as...
Most people, when they don't understand something, they frown. You smile.
Not saying for the Doctor either viewpoint is more important, but it's interesting to have the contrast. But this starts to show how far he's willing to go for Clara.
4.5 billion years.
I had a duty of care.
The pair end up travelling to Hell to meet Missy and...
Dr. Chang!
They all have a whole back and forth, and it then leads into one of the most interesting and genuinely bone-chilling ideas I've ever seen in science fiction.
Don't cremate me!
There is one.
Don't cremate me. I think something that this episode highlights more than anything is Doctor Who's place in television, or more so questions it. When it was first revived, it had successful spin-offs in the way of the Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood, with the former being more for kids and the latter being more of an adult take on the weird and wonderful world of Who. But as those shows soon ended, it still had the main show in the sweet spot. Family show on primetime Saturday evenings. It of course had jokes and references that went over my head as a kid.
I've come from the Doctor too.
Yes, but at a different point in time.
Unless there's two of them.
No. That's a whole different birthday.
But it always had brilliant moments of tension and some genuine horror sprinkled in. I remember as a child having to think, Doctor Who always comes good in the end, Doctor Who always comes good in the end, as a little 6-year-old who absolutely shit himself at this werewolf. And it's a fine line that the show has always tread brilliantly. But this episode inadvertently poses the question of how far is too far. The BBC got numerous complaints about this episode, saying it was too adult. But our favourite Time Lord has always had a very pronounced and clear relationship with death. Not just in the way that he can avoid it, but the show shows it clear as day on a practically weekly basis. But I'm intrigued as to what about this was too far. It's something which was somewhat started to be tackled in Torchwood, with them discussing what being dead was actually like. It's interesting that this is seen as too mature for a pre-Watershed show, even when death is everywhere in pop culture. But the moment it delves into the afterlife in such a morbid way, it's now mature. As explored in Rosencrantz, we must be born with an inherent knowledge of death, as few of us, if at all, remember the shocking revelation of not having eternal life. But what gets to me most about this idea isn't the screams and the pain of donating your body to science, or being cremated. It's regular burial. Having your body slowly decay, maybe feeling a few maggots working their way around. It genuinely left me up at night, even if at the time of airing the concept was completely wasted on my 14-year-old brain. An interesting perspective on this, not specifically on the 3Ws however, is from an interview I recently saw with Tennant and RTD from 2009, just before the specials came out. The interviewer asks Russell if there was anything he couldn't include in the family show because it was too dark.
Oh, we were very careful, I think having known Doctor Who all my life, literally since I was 3 years old, I know its borders very well, and so there was never anything that the BBC said you can't do that. There was never anything that I felt constrained by. I mean, a lot of the rules I imposed myself. There's no blood. In very, very rare instances do we see blood. There's not a BBC guideline on that. That's mine. That's saying it's wrong for this show. And prolonged suffering and things like that. You know, there's things, it's great to give children a scare and a thrill. There's a line you cross at which it's not clever to damage children and to give them nightmares and traumas that might last beyond the narrative. So it's just common sense in it, and I do think having been steeped in it works.
Yes, and it is one of those shows that, because there's a rites of passage, I think, as a child, in being scared just the right amount. And I think we go right to the edge of that. I think, but Waters of Mars is probably the next special is probably as downright creepy and adult.
I find this interesting in the phrase of prolonged suffering, as it is also something which has been explored in Doctor Who before, even by Russell, namely in the Series 2 opener, New Earth, where people literally spend their entire lives with every known illness. But similarly, the phrase, nothing that lasts beyond the narrative, is intriguing, specifically in the case of Doctor Who, as that's what it's famous for. When not a base under siege story, Doctor Who has always used relatable horror, making the everyday scary. Don't blink, don't think. Copycats? I remember every time driving past a graveyard, I'd make sure my eyes were peeled open looking out at the statues. Also, in literally shitting myself every time I see bubble wrap. But with the 3Ws, they link this back around to TV static on top of the morbid relation to death. Now that I'm a little older, it feels like something akin a bit more to the earlier series of Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone, for example. Especially in having Danny as the point of view character about to go through all of this, it made for an emotionally charged episode, especially with a separate reveal that had a larger effect on me personally. With Darkwater being mainly set up for death in heaven, it worked well in having a mixture of setups as well as payoffs for the series as a whole. Not only does it start with Clara about to tell Danny, but it also explores Danny's history as a soldier. All series we keep getting hit with a subtle phrase along the lines of, Danny was a soldier. Did you know Danny was a soldier? Reminder, Danny was a soldier. It felt like Moffat wanted to keep reminding us of it, to the extent where it felt more like...
The thing people don't realize about the Gear Wars is that it was never really about the gears at all.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, totally.
Rick, you gotta stop!
Morty, have you met Gearhead?
Hey, how's...
Morty here? He would love to hear all about the Gear Wars.
How familiar are you with the Gear Wars exactly?
Not at all.
Oh boy, I envy you. Okay.
Although what I found so affecting about this reveal is how painfully real it is. In my opinion, this is when science fiction is at its best. It puts characters into otherworldly situations, but then lets the characters and emotions guide where it goes, keeping a tight focus on the people involved. What feels so real about this, though, is that this feels way too commonplace and not too far of a stretch as fiction. It genuinely floored me and reinstated why I gravitate towards heroes that don't use violence. While I love me some John Wick, I find the characters like the Doctor or Batman, for example, to be far more intriguing to me, as yes, it would be easier if he just shot the Joker between the eyes. But violence causes more violence, and from a story perspective, it's much more interesting seeing a character outsmart a situation to come out on top. Take the opening confrontation between the Doctor and Clara, for example. If one of them pulled out a gun, it would not only make for a very different scene, but wouldn't necessarily have the same emotional connection and weight, as both of these characters are known to be more cerebral than physical. Which is then interesting when characters like that do turn, even if temporarily.
Get out of the way.
Working it into the Cybermen as well helped raise the stakes, but those 3 words have stuck with me since I first saw it. Cybermen have always lent themselves to body horror, which could easily be a concept that can be pushed further into a post-Watershed show. Again, listen to Spare Parts. But the 3 Ws is the kind of twisted fiction and ideas that I like, as Moffat's very clearly an ideas man. He's made me laugh, and he's made me cry more times than I'd care to mention. He's also given us some of the best damn episodes Doctor Who has to offer, with some very dark subject matters. And this only makes me all the more excited for Dracula.
Try and stay calm. You're doing very well.
In this series alone, we had a hot air balloon made of human skin. But I think the reason this is such a chilling idea is the way that death is seen as the end. Especially in shows, and even later in Capaldi's run, he didn't want to regenerate. He finally wanted peace and to let go. To stop all of the fighting and just rest. It's seen as peaceful, and in some cases a mercy. But this disrupts it completely out of anyone's control. It almost feels like it could be used in horror along the lines of, I have no mouth yet I must scream. In the painfully haunting way of the dead can't communicate, so there's no way of trying to aid them. From the get-go, Series 8 was set up to be darker, and it most certainly delivered on that. Having a Doctor questioning his morals, especially in the climax of Kill the Moon, was a fascinating choice, and then throughout the subsequent Capaldi series, seeing him slowly but surely becoming a lovable old man who gets not only the best out of himself, but tries to get the best out of others, with Missy going through a similar arc to 12 in the later half of Series 10.
Yes. Probably some devious plan, that sounds about right.
I don't know if Moffat got carried away with the idea of the 3 Ws, but nonetheless, it is a fascinating concept for science fiction to tackle, and I truly believe it's the darkest, most mature, and most adult Doctor Who has ever gone, whether that's for good or for bad. Here's the link to the full RTD and Tennant interview, as it's from a very interesting point in the show's history, and seeing those 2 again is just fantastic. I realise this was less of an analysis or traditional essay and more discussion or stream of thoughts, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Either way, thank you for watching.